Alright, so we're about 3 days away from the scheduled 11/11 protests, which are supposed to take place in Egypt to overthrow the government. Now, I already talked about this briefly 2 weeks ago here on TikTok, but the government is already moving and taking actions to prevent these protests from happening. They're setting up roadblocks, they're checking people's phones randomly on the street, they're checking IDs randomly, and some have said that they're setting up curfews to prevent anything from happening. Now, these protests will be happening whilst Egypt is hosting the climate conference. Now, all the world leaders are going to be in Egypt during this time. The conference already started this Sunday, and Biden is supposed to be arriving in Egypt on the day of the protests. So it's interesting to see, will the army and the police crack down on these protests if they do happen, whilst all these leaders and in front of all these cameras and journalists, are they going to crack down on them? Now, it's important to ask, why are these protests even happening in the first place? Now, this isn't the first time that Egyptians have rose up in an attempt to overthrow their dictator, Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. The first major protest took place 2 years after he got democratically elected into office. Now, the reason for these protests was because he gave away 2 strategic islands to Saudi Arabia. Now, these islands have been a part of Egypt for a very long time, and the Egyptian Supreme Court has ruled that these islands belong to Egypt, but nevertheless, el-Sisi overruled the court's rulings and insisted that these islands were Saudi, and he gave them away to them in 2016. The second major uprising that took place after Sisi was elected in 2014 was in 2019, when Egyptian whistleblower in exile exposed the corruption that was going on within the Egyptian government and the Egyptian army in regards to all the infrastructure that they were building, and the huge waste of money that was going on and the corruption that was going on. Now, these protests did have a significant effect because when they took place, el-Sisi was out of the country in the United States attending the UN. Now, he was scared to return when he saw these protests, and he was thinking of making his family flee to a neighboring Gulf state. But his wife refused to do so because she knew that if news broke out that they had fled, that the protests would already have taken over, and there would be no return for them to the presidency. I'm running out of time right now, but I'll make a part 2.